You ever have a thought so strong you just wished you could beam it right into someone else's head? Well, what if you actually could? Today, we're going to dive into one of the wildest scientific theories of the 20th century. It's this lost story right from the heart of the Soviet Union.
So it all kicks off with this book right here. And, at first glance, it looks like any other kind of dry academic textbook from that time, right? Published by the Ukrainian SSR Academy of Sciences. But that title, Biological Radiocommunication. Whoa, that wasn't just a title. It was a hint, a promise of something totally radical inside. And that title leads to this absolutely mind-bending question. Could your thoughts literally travel through the air like a radio signal? And get this wasn't being pitched as science fiction. Nope, this was framed as a serious scientific question. Could our brains actually be transmitters, just broadcasting our thoughts for anyone to pick up? So, who came up with this crazy idea? Well, this wasn't some think tank or university department. No, this was the life's work of just one guy, an engineer, of all people, who had the guts to take the cold, hard logic of his profession and point it directly at the warm, messy, mysterious world of the human mind.
And that man's name was Bernard Bernardovich Kaczynski. For Kaczynski, telepathy wasn't about any of the spooky stuff, crystal balls, psychic hotlines, none of that. He was absolutely convinced it was a natural process, something that followed the laws of physics, and he gave it a name.
Biological radiocommunication. The idea is actually pretty straightforward when you think about it. He believed our brains and our entire nervous system are basically organic radio sets. He argued that our thoughts get turned into electromagnetic waves, they get sent out into the world, and then, and this is the key part, if someone else is tuned to the right frequency, their own biological receiver can just pick it up.
Okay, so Kaczynski was an electrical engineer, right? So he did exactly what you'd expect an engineer to do. He looked at the human body and decided to deconstruct it, to reverse engineer it almost. He wanted to figure out how this incredible machine could possibly work. And this quote right here, this just perfectly captures how he was thinking. It's so interesting. He's not saying we can't receive these thought signals. He's saying the equipment is already built in. We just don't have the conscious user interface for it yet. The signal's coming in, but it's all happening just below the surface, just out of our conscious reach.
So this is where it gets really visual. This is his core idea right here. He's looking at a diagram of a nerve cell, a neuron on the left, and then he looks at a standard electrical circuit on the right. And to his engineer's brain, he sees a connection. Not just a resemblance, no, he saw the exact same blueprint. He thought they were functionally the same thing.
And he broke it down piece by piece, just like you would with any machine. Okay, so the brain, that's your transmitter. It creates the signal. A single neuron, that's just an electrical circuit. The nerve impulse shooting through it, well, that's the electromagnetic wave, the message itself. And the really cool part, all those millions of tiny nerve endings all over our bodies, you guessed it, those are the antennae.
I mean, he really got into the weeds with this. He pointed to specific things, like these little sensory receptors on our skin. He actually theorized that these tiny, super intricate nerve endings were the perfect shape to act as microscopic antennae, just constantly, passively, scanning the air around us for these thought waves. All right, so it's a fascinating theory for sure, but a theory is just a theory. An engineer needs proof. He needs data. And for what he believed was his best evidence, Kaczynski pointed to the absolutely incredible work of a famous animal trainer and his very, very special dog.
This guy, Vladimir Durov, was a total legend in Russia. I mean, people thought he had this almost magical way with animals, but Kaczynski saw it differently. He thought, that's not magic. That's it. That's a real-world example of my theory in action. It's biological radiocommunication.
So they set up this experiment, and they tried to make it as scientific as possible. Here's how it worked. First, a bunch of scientists would secretly agree on a really complex task for the dog. Then, Durov would take his dog, whose name was Mars, hold its head, and just stare into its eyes. And he would concentrate, intensely, mentally transmitting the entire command without saying a word or moving a muscle. And then, he'd just let the dog go.
And we're not talking about simple stuff like, fetch the ball here. Oh no. In one of the most famous experiments, which Kaczynski wrote about in his book, the scientists came up with this. The dog had to go into a totally different room, find one specific telephone book that was sitting on a table, and bring it back.
Pretty specific, right? And listen to how Durov himself described what he was doing. He said he wasn't just thinking about the phone book. No, he was mentally projecting the whole movie, scene by scene, the path the dog needed to take, what the book looked like, even the feeling of succeeding. He believed these mental signs were getting imprinted directly onto the dog's brain.
And the crazy part? It worked. I mean, it actually worked. The official report says that Mars trotted into the other room, completely ignored all the other stuff lying around, went right to that table, picked up the correct telephone book, and brought it back. Can you imagine being in that room? For the scientists watching, it must have been absolutely stunning.
And this wasn't just a lucky guess either. It wasn't a one-time thing. According to the lab's own records, they logged, get this, 1,278 successful mental suggestion experiments. And that was in just 20 months. That's a lot.
Okay, so this raises a huge question, right? If they had this much seemingly incredible evidence, why have most of us never heard of the brain radio theory? Why isn't this in textbooks? What happened? Why did this signal just fade out?
Well, the journey for this idea was a really long one. Kaczynski came up with it way back after World War I. He saw Durov's experiments in the 1920s and thought, that's it. But it took more than 40 years, 40, for his book to actually get published. And by the time it did in 1962, the scientific world was a different place. Neuroscience was taking off, with EEGs and new ways of looking at the brain, and, well, there just wasn't any room in those new models for simple radio waves.
So, where does that leave the whole brain radio idea? Well, today it's mostly seen as this fascinating piece of history, a really creative and honestly logical attempt to solve a huge mystery using the coolest tech of the time, which was radio. The problem was, those experiments, especially with a dog that's so incredibly in tune with its owner, you just can't rule out tiny unconscious clues. The theory was amazing, but it just couldn't deliver the kind of bulletproof, repeatable proof that real science needs.
So, yeah, Kaczynski's signal might have faded into static, but the question he was asking, that still echoes, doesn't it? He took a shot at explaining the unexplainable with the best tools he had, and it kind of makes you wonder. Okay, so if he was wrong about the radio waves, what deeper, maybe even weirder secrets is the human mind still hiding from us?